Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Friends, this afternoon I want to speak with you about the first several factors on the 12-factored dependent origination. That is, dependent on ignorance, arise sankhara, whatever that means. Dependent on sankhara arises consciousness. Dependent on consciousness arises mentality and materiality. In the later commentarial tradition that was brought to its full development, brought to a certain level of development in the Visuddhimagga of Buddhaghosa in the 5th century of the Common Era. It's given that the Avijja, the ignorance, is specifically described as ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. And the sankhara is described as the karmic formations as a result of the skillful and non-skillful acts of a previous lifetime. And based on the sankhara, there is the descent into the womb of the vijnana of a new life, a new existence, that new individual, as they mature in the womb and mature in their childhood, acquires the factors of mentality and materiality, including the 6 senses, and then thereafter to the middle section. This particular way of seeing dependent origination has been criticized by several commentators, although we do find support for that. I'd like to suggest that the Buddha was basically talking to people who had the wrong view, the eternalism wrong view, and felt that the consciousness was equal to the self or owned by the self, or some connection that the consciousness had a self, and the consciousness is going on from life to life and receiving the results of previous karma. This is the fallacy of Sati the fisherman in the sutta on the destruction of craving, which we discussed a couple of times in the past 2 days. And so the Buddha in the dependent origination is trying to demolish that fallacy of an eternal consciousness that runs along from life to life. And so clearly he's saying that the consciousness in this case is described as a new arising. There's another way of looking at it, which is as a kind of a parallel with creation stories or creation mythology. obviously, everybody would like to know where they come from. Even Sati the fisherman was interested, where did I come from? What was I in the past? And so forth like that. And the different religions offer explanations about creation mythology, creation stories. One of the creation stories that the Buddha would have been familiar with is called the Nasadiya Sukta in the Rigveda, which gives a creation story drawing on some universal motifs of mythology, like a watery, formless chaos that then God, the creator, is emerging out of this chaos. But in the Rigveda story, the development of existence and all the beings in existence is based on desire. So beings are evolving not from a divine decree, but through the energies found within. The Buddha is he has this is what the philosopher would call it, is epistemological humility. So he does not say that there was a moment or a time when the universe or the cosmos was created. Instead, he insists that the ultimate origin of everything is unknowable. So dependent origination is going back beyond what can be seen. But at the same time, there is to be said for this idea that a craving is a factor. To compare the beginning of dependent origination with the universal mythology, Avijja, or ignorance, can be compared with this a chaotic, watery darkness that comes before creation begins. And then the arising of consciousness can be associated with the sankharas can be associated with the appearance of the creator. That's what the sankharas do, is they form their formations that cause things to come into existence. And then with the arising of consciousness, there's like a moment in creation where, for example, in the Bible, God says, "Let there be light." So that's a moment in creation. The namarupa, which we think of as mentality and materiality, can be associated with this great division in the world, a great sort of a split, which is, you could say, it's the separation from light and of the world into light and darkness, or it's a separation of what we can experience into opposites. And we heard a few days ago in the sutta about conflict and dispute, that seeing things in this polarized way as good and bad mine and not bad, mine and not mine, inside, outside, this polarized way of experiencing the world is essentially tragic. And this is kind of like where suffering comes along. But there is this idea that this separation is part of the mythology of many cultures. In Egyptian culture, this moment, this point of creation is symbolized by a great cosmic cow who is, the sky separates from the earth, and the cow is holding up the sky on her back. And then the Salayatana, the sixfold senses, can be compared in different creation mythologies to the diversity of creation. And so God makes men and women and animals and fishes and birds and flowers and trees and days and nights and seasons and so forth, all the different varieties of creation. One sutta where this is given in our Pali canon is called the Aganya Sutta. It's number 27 in the Digha Nikaya. And this is not given as a serious teaching. It's given as a really funny satire on the old creation myths. I'm going to just tell you a little bit of it. There came a time after a long eon had passed, so the cosmos is not coming into existence, but it's contracting and expanding in cycles. There came a time after a long period, the cosmos contracts. As the cosmos contracts, sentient beings are headed for the realm of streaming radiance. So there are no beings left in the material world. And because of that, the material world has disappeared because there's no beings left to experience it. These beings in the realm of streaming radiance are mind-made, feeding on rapture, self-luminous, moving through the sky, steadily glorious, and they remain like that for a very long time, until there comes a time after a very long period has passed, this cosmos expands. As the cosmos expands, sentient beings pass away from the host of radiant deities and come back to this realm. So now the world has been created. Here they are mind-made, feeding on rapture, self-luminous, moving through the sky, steadily glorious. They remain like that for a long time. But the single mass of water at that time was utterly dark. That's a reference to that chaos that I was speaking of before. The moon and sun were not found, nor were the stars and constellations. Day and night, months and fortnights, years and seasons, or male or female, were not known. Beings were simply known as beings. After a very long period had passed, a solid nectar curdled in the water. It appeared just like the curd on top of hot milk rice as it cools. It was beautiful, fragrant, delicious, like ghee or butter. And it was as sweet and pure as Manuka honey. Now, one of these beings was reckless, thinking, oh my, what might this be? They tasted the solid nectar with their finger. They enjoyed it, and craving was born in them. And the other beings followed that being's example, tasting the solid nectar with their fingers. They also enjoyed it, and craving was born in them. So they started to eat the solid nectar, breaking it into lumps. And when they did this, their luminosity vanished. And with the vanishing of their luminosity, the sun and moon appeared. Stars and constellations appeared. Days and nights were distinguished. So too were months and fortnights, the years and seasons. And to this extent, the world evolved even more. And then those beings eat the solid nectar as their food and nourishment for a long time. And as long as they eat the solid nectar, their bodies become more and more solid, and they diverge in appearance, some beautiful, some ugly. The beautiful beings look down on the ugly ones. We are more beautiful. They are the ugly ones. The vanity of the beautiful ones made the solid nectar vanish. And they gathered together and grieved and moaned. Oh, what a taste. Oh, what a taste. And this is, the story goes on. The beings keep falling further and further until they come to a very low and miserable state with private property, sex, shame, wars, conflicts, and exploitation. And then finally, during a time of warfare, some of the people think of hiding in the forest and eating, surviving on roots and berries and fruits that they could find in the forest during the period of the war. And after the war is over, they come out from the forest and they find their friends and say, "Oh, friend, are you alive?" And they have this idea, suppose we tried following the precepts of morality. And so they undertake the precepts, and then they undertake meditation, and gradually then there's an upward evolution that goes on and on until some beings are reborn outside of this world into the immaterial world, until finally the last being departs from the material world and is reborn in the immaterial world. And at that point, the material world disappears. So that's a universal archetypal mythology of creation. And it may be that here we are now. A few of us may have some insight into some of our previous births. Many of us cannot even remember the births that they had in this life, much less being able to remember anything that happened before that. So we don't have, in general, the ability to directly experience and know about the sankharas or the creation with this idea that there was a previous karma that caused us to be reborn in the realm and the type of rebirth that we've taken now. But there is a way that this kind of archetypal knowledge, which is expressed in universal mythology, is something that's known at some level by humans. This is why the human species has such a universal elements that are expressed in mythology. Before I woke up, I didn't know any better. When I was a baby or a child, I didn't know how to be mindful. I didn't know how to be wise. so much that I experienced, I was just acting like a baby or acting like a child, without insight, without self-awareness. So much that I experienced, whatever was difficult for me was just forgotten. And just a very few memories could have remained, even from early childhood in this lifetime, not to mention in the previous lifetimes. So Avijja, this not knowing, is both, it's already, we can see that there's three different meanings. One is not understanding the Four Noble Truths. That's a standard meaning in the commentary. One is the primordial chaos of before creation in the creation mythology. And one is something that we can simply and easily know from our own experience. There are a lot of things that we don't know, a lot of things that we didn't know before. And then coming to sankhara, that's very often translated as volitional formations, or Bhante Sujato translated as choices, intentional acts of body, speech, and mind, which are good or bad, punya or papa, or you could say they're skillful or unskillful. And those intentional actions result in creating or supporting the subsequent suffering or the subsequent happiness of oneself and others. But there are some very different ways of taking sankharas in the suttas. Usually in the 5 khandhas and the 5 aggregates affected by clinging, sankhara definitely takes on this sense of volitional formations or volitional intentions. In the Chula Vedala Sutta, it's stated that there are 3, the determination, the bodily sankhara, speech sankhara, and mental sankhara are explained as the in and out breath is the sankhara of the body. Thinking and pondering is the sankhara of speech. Perception and feeling is the sankhara of the mind. And so now in this case, it's really given as example of a kind of a causation or a supporting condition, that this living body would not exist without in and out breath. So as long as there is breath, there is a living body. So the breathing is a supporting condition of the physical body, of the body. And then the speech, when we break out into the kind of verbal speech, what one can hear, before doing that, there's thinking and pondering. So there's like an internal, like a self-talk that's happening when our perceptions, our experience that we're having internally gets enunciated into words. And then once it's through thinking and pondering, it's enunciated to words, then we come to speech. And then the mind, or the chitta, in Lady Visakha's explanation, the mind arises from the activities of the mind, particularly the activities of perception and feeling. So that's a different way of looking at sankhara. There's a third way of looking at sankhara, which is in terms of what's called in Buddhism the 5 niyamas. Niyamas are like rules of nature. The Kamma Niyama is one of the rules of nature. And so in the Kamma Niyama, the wholesome and unwholesome deeds, the skillful and unskillful deeds that you do in one life are affecting the type of rebirth that follows, and also what is experienced subsequently, whether it be pleasant or unpleasant. There's also what's called a Dhamma Niyama, which is the rule of Dhamma. And that rule is all things are impermanent, all things are without self, all things are unsatisfactory. And so it could be, in the context of dependent origination, you could say why things get born, why things come into existence. Well, it's because of impermanence. That's one of the reasons why things come into existence. Another one of the niyamas is called Avijja Niyama. Avijja means a seed, and that's the rule of genetics that applies to living beings. And so you could say, well, beings come into existence governed by Avijja Niyama, that a human being is born from 2 other human beings. So trees do not give birth to human beings, and cats do not give birth to rabbits, and so forth. So the kind of existence we take is also governed by that type of causation. Then there's another one that's called the Uttu Niyama, which are the laws that govern non-living matter. So things like gravity, the laws, thermodynamics, and other kinds of natural laws are part of Uttu Niyama. And, we're in a type of a world that has a particular type of gravity that we have here. And so that affects our existence, doesn't it? And then last of all, the last niyama is called Chittanyama, which are the rules governing psychology, or governing how consciousness, perception, and thoughts arise. And so you could say that, well, sankhara is the sankhara that's determining how we come into existence, is all of those things. It's not just limited to the law of karma. And remembering the advice not to be worried so much or trying to get in this, like, with this individual ownership idea that what was I in the past and how did I become what I became now? That what to me is even more helpful in contemplating the creation section of dependent origination is to reflect about these things as a pattern that applies to all sentient beings. So all sentient beings are arising because of causes. The continuation of this cycle of arising and cessation, this cycle of birth and aging and death, is perpetuated because of not having the penetrating insight into the Four Noble Truths. And it applies to me personally, and it applies to all the beings who are going around in samsara. And it's just not that personal. It's like the experience that I'm having is part and parcel with the experience that everybody's having. Depending on the sankhara arises consciousness, then name and form, and then the six sense bases. This placement of consciousness is confusing because we have been trained in many different places in many different ways to expect that consciousness, vijnana, is arising moment by moment in connection with the internal and external sense bases, and the conjunction of those, of the consciousness and the sense bases, which gives the arising of experience. And that consciousness is not something permanent, but something that's arising and passing away moment by moment in that context. But in this case, the consciousness is put sort of like 2 steps preceding the six sense bases. So there is the explanation given in some of the sutras about the consciousness descending into the womb of the parent, of the woman. But in this case, there's a relationship between consciousness and name and form, which I'll come to in a couple of minutes. And those 2 factors are put together to develop and tease out the interrelationship and the mutual dependency between consciousness and name and form. So the impermanent and non-self nature of consciousness in this case is being explained by the way that it's in that interdependency with name and form. But it's also following in a kind of like as a parody of the creation myth, that it's given this kind of a separate position. There's another take on consciousness that I've reflected about a lot, and it's not something that I've heard from the teachers, so you can take it as or leave it as you like. But if you think about the 5 aggregates of clinging, form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. I spoke before about how you could look at our emotional reactivity, or you could say the process of life operating in terms of the 5 khandhas, that the process of life is manifesting through changes in the body. We feel it and instantly feel that kind of judgment, or that polarization between what's pleasant and unpleasant, what's liked and disliked, and then affected by the feeling tone of our experience. Perceptions arise, which may be very truthful and on the mark, or they may also be biased and not accurate. And then there's a kind of a synergy between Vedana and Sanya, between perception and feeling, where we can get ourselves sort of like wound up or bring more energy into the coming to a decision, or coming to forming an intention to do something, and that's the sankhara, the volitional formation. And then when I spoke about this the other day, I sort of bypassed what consciousness really is on this set of 5. So if you are identifying with the 5 aggregates. Then instead of just being 5 khandhas, it's 5 upadana khandhas, 5 clinging khandhas. You identify them, each one of them, or all of them together, as being, this is me, or this belongs to me, or this is my essential self. So if I believe that, like, who am I? Well, I'm a mass of living flesh and bones and nerve cells and wet things and bounded up by skin. And that's the body, and that's kind of like a definition of who I am. If I really believed that that was the complete definition of me, then that would be pretty stressful, wouldn't it? Because because the body is so subject to affliction, and also the body doesn't last very long. So if I thought the essence of me is my body, my material body, then I'm kind of it's a materialistic kind of world, and I could be very grieved and extremely anxious, saying, oh, you know, this body is going to die, I'm going to die. And then a person could identify with their feelings. They could think that like, my feelings are valid for me, and I don't really care what you feel about it. That as far as I'm concerned, my feeling is what is important. And if I feel a certain way, then I have to act in accordance with my feelings. And to act opposite to my feelings would be like to go against myself. So if I think that the essence of me is my feelings, it would be like that. And also, that would be not a very pleasant existence, because feelings are so unstable. And a person who was really completely ruled by their feelings would probably be classified as being mentally ill, because they would be so unstable. In terms of volitions or decisions, in terms of perceptions, again, we have the metaphor of the merry-go-round, of that's all the things that we experience is going around and around on a merry-go-round. You know, the different horses and the carriage and the different animals, the different creatures that you have in a merry-go-round keep going by. And then at the center of the merry-go-round is a mechanism. And there's a person standing there, the operator. And the operator can stand still and watch all the things go by. And then if I reflect, I'm maybe philosophically inclined, and I think about like what is real. And I notice that the only way that I can discern what's real is by means of my perceptions, and that there's something that's there in the middle. There's this complete thing that keeps going around and around, and there's something in the middle which is standing still. And so that must be the self, the essence of me, who I am. And again, we get into a lot of quarrels in this world because of people who may claim that, like, my perceptions are valid for me, and it doesn't matter if other people have a different perception that's not valid for me, and I should cling onto my perceptions, and it would be some kind of like a violation. I would be going against myself if I abandon my perceptions in order to try to take on board somebody else's perceptions. So that's the identification with perceptions. Identification with Volitional formations is like identifying with our aspirations, our decisions, even our karma, if we have an understanding of karma. If I say that I'm the owner of my karma, if that statement is made with a self view, we could be in trouble. We would be getting into a materialistic fallacy, even though we're like very close to being in the realm of the Buddhist teachings. It would be a materialistic fallacy to say, I am the karma being, the essence of me is the karma that I inherit, or the essence of me is the karma that I'm about to do. And then the vijnana is frequently explained as the knowing faculty that knows these other factors and kind of like integrates them together and knows them as being like one system. In another way, the vijnana is the most horrible and painful of all of the 5 khandhas of clinging, or you could call them the 5 khandhas of suffering. The worst khandha of suffering, the worst khandha of clinging is consciousness, because when we know vijnana, jnana is knowing, vi is separate. The vijnana knows me, this individual, as a separate person, as a separate self. It's actually the vijnana that has can have the function of a kind of knowing which is inherently tending to be false and deluded, that knows the whole system as a self. And the vijnana, then it both locks together the whole system, all of the aspects of mentality and materiality get locked together in vijnana, and they are leaning forward towards creating a continuity, or creating an impression of continuity, creating a delusion of continuity, leaning forward into this next rebirth. And so the vijnanupadana khandha, the clinging aggregate of consciousness, in a certain way you could say that is the rebirth consciousness. And it's not because I'm taking a materialistic understanding of the cycle of rebirth, but rather saying the consciousness is keeps creating this continuity and creating this existence. And what the Buddha is doing in his teaching is deconstructing this existence. So he's deconstructing, we talked about this before, this ati, nati, which is this eternal unchanging existence. And he's also deconstructing bhava, which is this continuously changing and evolving existence. That we don't want to settle on either one of them. Both of them are just keeping us tied down in the cycle of rebirth. So this is my idea about what consciousness is. Consciousness gives rise to name and form. Name in the commentary, they're translated as mind and body. But then it's kind of like confusing how mind, how consciousness is separate from mind. Our body is sometimes broken down into the elements of materiality, and the mind is translated into 6 factors. I'm sorry, I'm going to look them up. This is from the Vibhanga Sutta, which is in the Sutta references that I already emailed you. The name and form would say is a material object and its name. So the name is analyzed into feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention. These 5 factors are developed in the Honeyball Sutta. And there's a wonderful article by Bhikkhu Analayo called The 5 Fingers of Nama, which is also in the references that I gave you. A very, another way of thinking about it or meditating about it is this idea about how, like, phenomena have their sort of like a natural existence. And then when we assign a name to it, then it becomes real to us in a different kind of way. So there's a tree in the forest. It has all the qualities that it has. It has all the process of life. It's interacting with the environment. It's sort of like standing silent in nature. And then an observer comes along and gives it a name and says, that's a redwood. Or that's the redwood in the parking lot. And then something just happened with our way of knowing the redwood, that it's like how the curds of the luminous radiance curdled into curds that were sweet, and it became like a solid kind of thing in a different kind of way. And before it was named, it was more like just kind of like a flow of process, a flow of existence. And then when we name it, it's like you put a pin in it, and then it's named and it's fixed. The consciousness and name and form are also sometimes referred to as the individual. So an individual being who, was conceived in the womb and got born and then grew up as a child and acquired their mature faculties as a being with a mind and a body. And then that's sort of described as being like an individual who is able to go out in the world and have their experiences. But in another way, if you think of mentality and materiality as just a dynamic flow of process, the consciousness and mentality and materiality are interdependent. They're leaning together like two sheaves. two sheaves of wheat. I guess after you harvest the wheat and you bundle them up into sheaves, and then you lean the sheaves against each other so that they don't get spoiled. If you take away the consciousness, the name and form falls down. If you take away the name and form, the consciousness falls down. The consciousness is co-created with name and form, and it's limited by name and form. It doesn't go beyond name and form. So like consciousness is always consciousness of something. And so then in this example, it's the consciousness of the body that you have with its qualities, and the feeling, perception, intention, consciousness, attention, the different mental factors that we have. So this proves that consciousness is not an eternal thing. Instead, it's something that is arising moment by moment, subject to dependent origination. As long as the supporting factors exist, consciousness exists. When those other factors fall away, consciousness falls away. I think I better stop here. I hope that within all this jumble, you might have heard a few ideas or images that can be images for contemplation. Thinking of the way that clinging and identification with these factors has got so much dukkha involved in it. But also seeing how this flow of phenomenon, it's just got its own nature. And the process of life goes on. And without the clinging and without the identification, then it's possible to just have our experience flow along with this flow of arising without any clinging and without dukkha, without craving.